some way or another, fallout from the LSU and Florida and everything is going to get back to Oregon.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or first view of the day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. One of my favorite segments. Can only do it so many times. A week from now, I can't do individual standouts because Oregon plays bye week this week, and I don't think I can make an individual standout segment from a game that doesn't actually happen. But I can for this week's game, mailbag questions, quarterback chatter, trivia's back because it's a Tuesday, of course. This episode is jam-packed and brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. I got to give some credit to my guy Eric Skopel over at 24/7. I went on his show. You can check out our crossover over on his channel. And he brought up the idea of Jeff Brom getting a head coaching opportunity at one of the places currently available, and that would create an opening at Louisville. And I hadn't pondered that because Jeff Brom is a really good football coach, really good. He was at Purdue. He won games. He left. They crashed, and they're still trying to pull themselves out of the literal bottom of the Big Ten. You know, them and Penn State at the moment, which is wild, but here we are. That's what Oregon did to him. Anyway, so Jeff Brom is now at Louisville. He beat Mario Cristobal last week. Louisville's into the top 25, one-loss team, potential ACC championship playoff contender, maybe. I don't know if their team overall is good enough for that, but regardless, Jeff Brom is a good football coach and has been for quite a while. So if he wants to go somewhere beyond Louisville, there's no world in which you look at Louisville and say, it's a better job than Florida or LSU. Because if you are a good enough football coach, you go to Florida or LSU, you're going to be able to succeed. It's not a UCLA caliber job or, Oklahoma State kind of has this in the Big 12 as well, where you go there and, you got some hurdles to clear. You could start to win, but it's an uphill battle. You don't have that. At Florida and LSU, those coaches have made it look that way, but it's not. So the reason I say this is going to tie back to Oregon in some form or fashion. One reason that I and others were high on Oregon coming into this season is they have coaching staff continuity, which is really rare. Oregon didn't lose a major coach from last season to this year. And when you consider how successful Oregon's been, the strength of Oregon's brand, that's actually pretty surprising. I don't know how that happens again. I really don't. Like on Spencer's scale of agreement for Oregon retains every major coach that you know the name of, or maybe even the ones you don't know the name of, that's sitting at a brisk 1.5. A brisk 1.5. If the Louisville job were to come open, if Jeff Brom decides he wants to go to Florida and they want to hire him to be their head coach, could happen. If he decides he wants to go to LSU, or if he decides to take the Arkansas job just to get into the SEC, then the Louisville job would be open. I don't know how Will Stein would be outside of a top 3 on the candidates list for that particular coaching vacancy. But even if that doesn't happen, because that's a couple of dominoes, right? This has to happen and this has to happen. Okay, that's fair. The number of other jobs that come open have ripple effects that go all over the place. And this cycle is crazier than anyone that I can remember because you have Florida, LSU, and Penn State. Those are 3 of the 10 to 12 best jobs in all of college football. 12 is probably too conservative. I'm just covering all my bases here. Like those are elite premier college football jobs. And Florida State could come open as well if they decide to move on from Mike Norvell. They still haven't won an ACC game in over 2 years, I think it is at this point. Like it is a complete and utter mess ever since they beat Alabama to begin the season, which is just one of those confusing outcomes. But if that job comes open, well, now you could have another high-profile job. Florida State is a great college football job. Of course, we have seen an Oregon coach go there once before. And I'm not suggesting anything coming back to Dan Lanning, as I talked about on yesterday's show. My confidence level that Lanning is staying at Oregon, regardless of what job comes open, is really high. We went through this with Alabama, with Auburn when Hugh Freeze got hired, with Texas A&M. Lanning has been steadfast in his commitment to the Ducks. He is more than well compensated by the Oregon Athletic Department. Maybe his agent leverages this to get another raise, but he got one before the year. I just think that everything lines up for Dan Lanning to stay with the Ducks. But for the rest of the coaches on his staff, someone's going to find an opportunity somewhere. I just think because Oregon's staff has too many high-level guys on it. A name that I think could wind up off Oregon staff following this season is Chris Hampton, the co-defensive coordinator, DB coach, last year's recruiter of the year from 24/7 Sports, bringing in a historic haul defensive backs to the Ducks, like Brandon Finney, amongst others. I think that that's somebody who will have an opportunity. He's been buzzed and rumored before to, be looking at defensive coordinator jobs. It happened in the last cycle. He didn't go anywhere. But with all the turnover and all these jobs, you don't just have a head coach. You've got two coordinators unless you have a head coach that is the play caller, and that's increasingly rare in college football. Lincoln Riley at USC, Brent Venables at Oklahoma calls the defense, but most coaches are CEOs. So they're going to look to hire, as Lanning has done, an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. Well, Chris Hampton is a guy that I can see going to get a Power 4 defensive coordinator job, and there are going to be a lot. And this might not even be at LSU, a state that he has history in, going back to his time at Tulane. It might not be at Florida. It could be at a Virginia Tech. It could be at Penn State. It could be at Oklahoma State. Having the title of a full-time DC would probably present a bump in salary from what he's making now, even though I'm pretty sure he's well compensated as a member of Oregon staff. He would also be the defensive play caller. We know that's Tosh Lupoy. And if he wants to be a head coach one day, that's probably the next step in his career. So that's somebody that I would watch for as all these jobs, start to not just come open, but at some point within the next couple months before the portal opens in early January, I think you will see these jobs get filled and the hires will get made, and it's just going to be a mad scramble. Because it's not just that there are a lot of opportunities, it's that there are a lot of high-level schools to go to really bolster your resume that anybody who's an ambitious coach would want to go and be at. So, yeah, Hampton is somebody I could see being defensive coordinator. Rashad Samples has been awesome for Oregon, just phenomenally awesome as a running backs coach. What he's done on the recruiting trail, of course, he was a big part of bringing DeCorian Moore to the Ducks. That's a guy who I could see get an opportunity somewhere. Those three guys are, I think, the top assistant coaches that I think at least one is gone by 2026. If those three coaches are all back, Dan Lanning is, I wouldn't have the word. Look at that. I just ran out of the words. I come on here and talk for the Ducks about 30 minutes a day. I don't know what sort of pitch Lanning is making to those guys, but I just can't see them all getting passed up for opportunities with the number of jobs and opportunities that are open. I just think that they're too good. Their profile at Oregon has, of course, grown. That's part of the reason they wanted to come and be on Dan Lanning's staff, and I'm sure they feel like they've gotten better because we know Dan Lanning's a really good coach and has a good track record of getting coaches elsewhere. Kenny Dillingham, most notably, is doing great down at Arizona State. Didn't have a great weekend. They lost at home to Houston, but Houston's a program on the rise right now. So anyway, I just was thinking about that and realized, man, I don't see how there's any way Oregon isn't affected. The Will Stein dominoes could fall in that direction. It's not unthinkable. It really is not. For some people, that's exactly what you want right now. And for other people, not so much. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter. All of that good stuff. Individual standouts. Oh, man. I love who I get to shout out this week. First, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back. There's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. They've got you covered. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. Keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And if you want to bet college football, if you think you know how Oregon's games are playing out every single week, FanDuel is here for you because they've got the Oregon games, they've got the rest of the college football games, point spread, money line, point total, prop bets, everything you could possibly want. FanDuel has you covered. Right now, new customers can get $300 in bonus bets with FanDuel when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up, play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Second segment sips are always important. Always important. It is important to give individual shout-outs to those players who, upon my rewatch of the game, stood out but maybe didn't pop in the box score. You know, shouting out Jordan Davison, that's too easy. Way too easy. I'm talking guys that maybe didn't make a play you'd remember, but if you went back and watched as closely as I did, you'd go, oh, wait, he had a big impact on the game. Let me start. First and foremost, with the Oregon equipment staff. I will be fully honest here. I did not have as much hype around the Grateful Dead uniforms as many of you probably did. Lanning said they toned them down from where they were in an earlier rendition, meaning they probably had more tie-dye to them. I cannot tell you a single member of the Grateful Dead band. I cannot tell you a single member of the Grateful, or a single song the Grateful Dead has written. It just has never been my jam. I'm more of a Billy Joel, Elton John type of guy, which is true. Those are my favorite artists of all time in that order. And the uniforms on Saturday were just phenomenal. So equipment staff, great work. Great work. I had a buddy who's a Texas fan send me a message to go, some of the best Oregon uniforms, top 3 of all time. I said, dang. And then I looked at them even closer after seeing them on Saturday and going, yeah, they're really, really good. Anyway, on a more serious note, Jeremiah McLaughlin had 2 third-down catches on a day where passing the ball and catching it was exceedingly difficult. And McLaughlin in the last couple of weeks has overtaken Malik Benson as the next wide receiver for the Ducks. And I think that's a function of, the routes that are being dialed up. I am surprised, I'm going to touch on this, I think, at some point later in the week. The back shoulder fades that we saw to Decorian Moore and Malik Benson earlier in the year, I don't know where those went. And I would love to see him come back as Oregon's passing game is in a little bit of a funk, as I talked about on yesterday's show. That's more about Dante Moore than it is anyone else. But, McClellan on 3rd and 10 and 3rd and 6, those were not easy catches to make, especially the one in the second half on the corner route where it's just absolutely pouring. I think McClellan's looking like a guy. And this Oregon receiving talent's really, really good. So, McClellan's one guy that definitely deserves a shout-out. Not big stats, but nobody really had big stats, and McClellan had a couple of big spots. And then Janoris Wilson, who was far from perfect in this game, to be sure. I definitely didn't look at what Janoris Wilson did to this game and think, oh, man, how was he not start? No, I understand why there's a rotation, why they're trying to find the right combination with him, Davey Uli, and Alex Harkey. I imagine we'll continue to see all 3 on the right side of that offensive line going forward. Alik Terry hasn't been shy about rotating guys throughout the last couple of seasons. And his interview after the game is worth a watch. He talks about the dance that he did, and Lanning had a quote about it. But, catching a touchdown, it's the second of his career. It's awesome that this is the role he's got. But, he goes out there and he is definitely more capable as a run blocker. He's really good. As a pass blocker, there's some not so good reps out there. Improvement is warranted. That is a fair assessment, I think, of how he's played so far. But there were some moments when Oregon was running the ball well in the second half. Janoris Wilson had a couple of really, really good blocks that were clearing the way for Jordan Davison, Noah Whittington, or whoever was carrying the ball. So he definitely deserves a shout out as well. And then I get so excited. It makes me feel really, really good. It really does. It really does when an individual standout is Amari Washington, because I am chair of the Amari Washington fan club, a role that I appointed myself to, I believe back in January, roughly around that time, and I started the hype train all off season. And it's gotten to the point where I'm hoping Amari Washington comes back next year, but I don't know. Oregon might have a second straight defensive tackle drafted in the first round after Derek Harmon last year, because Bear Alexander and Amari Washington, those guys are playing really well. And I think the guys behind them, which have really stabilized into a combo of Terrence Green and Tioni Gray. Some Aiden Breland in there as well, but it's been Gray and Green that have done. I just realized those guys both have colors for last names, and they both start with G. How about that? Anyway, the Gray and Green tandem has been solid, but the more I watch Bear Alexander, what was USC doing, man? How did they not get more out of this guy? They messed up big time there, but Oregon's a beneficiary, and they're getting a lot out of Bear Alexander, but he and Amari Washington in this game, Wisconsin didn't do a whole heck of a lot offensively, and Oregon's defensive success, the whole D-line is great. I expected them to be before the year. They have lived up right to my expectation level. Bear and Amari are a big reason why. And early this year, Tioni Gray was getting the first team reps with Amari Washington, and Bear would rotate in. Yeah, that has changed. When Oregon is in a big spot, anytime they can, it is 52 and number one in the middle, and those two guys just keep playing really well. They're disruptive in the run game. They get their hands up in the passing game. Are they elite pass rushers? Amari's better than Bear, but the work they do to help contain the run game, put pressure on quarterbacks, and just not get moved around. Yeah, that's something that's always worthy of a shout out. Hard to create stats as a defensive tackle, and those guys I thought played really well. If you have an individual standout you think I overlooked, drop it in the comments below or hit me up on Twitter. Sean sends in this one for Spencer Scale of Agreement. Can we finally start questioning Will Stein's horrible offense after this pathetic first quarter? He is more vanilla than Tobey Maguire's character in Pleasantville. Well, first of all, Tobey Maguire is the best of the Spider-Mans. I love Tom Holland. I do. He's great. Tobey Maguire is the best one with the best combo of movies as well. So can we finally start questioning it? Look, Will Stein gets put under a microscope every week because his side of the ball is not playing as well as Tosh Lupoi. And, Tosh was questioned pretty heavily last year because of the performances against playoff teams, and those questions persisted coming into this season, and I think he's answered a lot of them to this point. You can't really argue with how the defense is played. It's pretty nitpicky to look at that side of the ball and try to find things where Oregon has to improve. But yeah, I talked about the first quarter yesterday. It was bad. No doubt about it. There were a number of things that were wrong. Some of it was on Will Stein, and some of it was on guys just not making plays. As an OC, you can run a play in practice all week. You dial up at the right time, and if guys don't execute or if Dante Moore misses a read, is that on you for not preparing the players? Or sometimes guys just have to be able to hunker down and make a play. I think the best example of that was the gate formation. They bring Benson in motion. They fake the fly sweep, and Jamari Johnson doesn't have a player within 10 yards of him. And Dante Moore just doesn't see him. Why? I don't know. Kind of looked like the play was designed for him, and he didn't see it. He didn't see it. There was kind of pressure, but he should have been able to see it there, and he just didn't. Is that Will Stein's fault? No, that's Dante Moore's fault. So it's a team effort to play as poorly as Oregon did on offense, but Will Stein is part of that team. So can we finally start questioning? I mean, fans have already started questioning. I don't think that you need a permission structure there, but am I constantly evaluating Oregon's three most important coaches, head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator? Yeah. So I guess this is a 10 because you're saying, can we start questioning? Yeah, should always be doing that. That's part of what I'm doing here on the show. But if you mean this in the spirit of, should we really start to feel bad about Will Stein on offense? No, I'm at a 3.5. I'm at a 3.5 on that. It's not a 1 for sure because there have been some subpar sequences. But if one game, really 1.5 quarters before the weather got bad, and then you can't judge a whole lot of anything there, is your reasoning for why Will Stein should be questioned. Well, does the Rutgers game just not count then? Like, that's going against two inferior opponents. One was good, one was bad. And this is just more prevalent in all of college football than you probably realize. Kirby Smart's defense isn't playing well this season. Is he a bad defensive coach? Is he not any good? Does he need to make a change? Maybe Bulldog fans want a new defense coordinator over there, and they miss Dan Lanning. Maybe that's the case. But, yeah, so can you start questioning? Yes. Okay, that letter of the question there is a 10, but in the spirit in which I imagine you meant it, Sean, I'm at a 3.5. The Soda Report says, hey, Spencer, quick question for the show. I imagine you're getting lots of questions about Will Stein. Oh, yeah, that's right. I put this rundown together. I was like, wow, 2 questions in a row about Will Stein. Like, oh, Spencer, you did this yourself. All right, I'm going to add to that. Sorry. Dakorien Moore and Sadiq combined for 4 catches on 51 yards. This is the second time in 2 weeks the studs weren't fed. My question is, what the hell? That's good. That's pretty good. So, on the Will Stein note, this is the number one thing. No, sorry. This is the number 2 thing. The number 2 thing that I'd say peeves me at times the most watching this Oregon offense is what you're alluding to here. That you have 2 freakishly talented playmakers that are not getting maximized in the box score. Now, some of that is indeed a function of Oregon having so many weapons. They don't need to go to Dakorien Moore for 12 targets. However, and Dakorien Moore consistently leads Oregon in receptions and yards on a week-by-week basis, but because of what I'm talking about, the numbers are just not quite eye-popping. He's at 496 yards and 3 touchdowns this year, 3 or 4 touchdowns this year. But yeah, he's capable of more than that. What I can't get behind sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a moment. We're gonna just do a little soft reset in the middle of the question here. I agree on Sadiq and Moore not getting the ball enough. Saturday is a tough one to look at and say, why didn't they get the ball? Well, no one really got the ball a ton because throwing was immensely difficult. So on Saturday, I'll give him a little bit of a pass. And then you go back to the Rutgers game, and Oregon got that game out of hand. How? Explosives to Sadiq and an explosive touchdown to Dakorien Moore. It's not a coincidence. There are definitely times where I watch the offense and go, man, why does it feel like these guys are being hidden or not featured more prominently? Totally agree. The number one thing that has bugged me for the last throughout the last couple of games, though, is definitely the lack of continuity and consistency with how much run success Oregon is having. That's my number 1 gripe. Number 2 is that you've got these star playmakers and they're not being maximized to their fullest extent. So that's hopefully the sort of answer to the question that you were looking for. Despite the stumble in the middle, I think we made it work. So, more questions to get to. Yeah, you're just going to have to stick around. First, this episode brought to you by Game Time. College football's back, and I love that. You love that. Tailgates, rivalries, energy in the stands, it's all great. But you don't want to hassle to get to the games. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. Oregon only has a handful of games left in the regular season, just 4, which is crazy. 8 football games have already been played, 4 left. If you want to go, Game Time's the place that you want to get your tickets. The app that gives the advantage back to fans is the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. It's that simple. I've used Game Time recently to buy tickets to an Oregon basketball game in November against Auburn in Vegas. I'll be there. The process on Game Time was great. I saved money using Game Time compared to other ticketing services because I went and checked, and I was thinking, well, what would I have paid if I'd gone on another site and bought tickets in the same section? Oh, what do you know? Save money with Game Time. Did that when I bought tickets to see Nate Bargatze in Vegas as well. Sorry, John Mulaney, not Nate Bargatze. But thinking about going on Game Time, getting tickets to see Nate Bargatze in Salt Lake City. They have everything you need. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. All right, Fly Rothstein says, everyone's talking about Dallas Wilson potentially coming back, but how more likely is it for Cam Coleman to enter the transfer portal and find his way to Eugene? Would you be excited for that addition? So Cam Coleman's the former 5-star receiver at Auburn. They won over the weekend against Arkansas. Hugh Freeze might have stabilized the situation. The exact same framing of the discussion that I talked about with DJ Pickett at LSU or Dallas Wilson at Florida would apply to Cam Coleman, where if the head coach does get fired or if the head coach has been fired, the NIL collective's number one priority will be how do we keep that guy around. So I would be over the moon if Oregon somehow wound up getting Cam Coleman, who's a top 5 receiver in all of college football. This is less likely, I think, than Dallas Wilson. There are no ties, nothing. This would just have to be a new relationship, basically, that gets established. I don't know if Oregon's had any contact with him going back to when he was getting recruited to a variety of schools coming out of high school. Maybe there was something, but no, they're not super strong ties here. No, it is far less likely that Oregon winds up with Cam Coleman. But would I be excited? I'd be borderline obnoxious here on the show. I'd be so excited. Brian, SSA for you here on the QB situation. Unfortunately, college football is more of a business than ever before. What are the chances both Novosad and Moga have, one, expressed their interest in the transfer portal, or two, the coaching staff is making their job unlikable enough to push them out? All of that to clear a path for the return of JKS next year to, one, start if Dante goes to the NFL, or two, back him up in redshirt like Dante did last year if he does not, therefore being the front runner for our starting quarterback in 27-28. Love the show. Go Ducks. Yeah, the JKS return is not something Oregon fans should start to think about at all. I've been told that there was maybe not the cleanest of breaks when he went back to Cal. He was never supposed to wind up at Oregon. There was a whole other situation behind the scenes at Berkeley that led to him going to the Ducks, but I don't think that relationship, based on what I was told, has been maintained at a high level. Now, bridges can be amended, of course, so perhaps that could come to fruition, but yeah, there was a lot in that SSA there, Brian. I'll go with the first part. The chances that Novosad and Moga have both expressed their interest in the transfer portal, 3. I think Brock Thomas is just better. Lanning was kind of salty about it when he got asked a question. Now, James Crepey asked him a question, so I can always put him a little bit on edge, as we've noticed. But, he was also adamant, and I think fairly so, that, hey, Brock Thomas is quarterback too, because he's earned those reps and locker room loves him. The other guys have done well, and it is hard to watch Brock Thomas and not think that he's good enough to be the backup quarterback. Doesn't mean he's as good as Dante Moore. But what about the way he played on Saturday? Dante Moore could have returned to the game, and Dan Lanning left him out there because he probably didn't want to risk another injury to Dante, and he knew that Brock Thomas was going to be able to execute a game plan of a couple simple passes. He only attempted 4. They were all completions. One was almost an interception, but he attempted 4 passes and handed the ball off a bunch. Like, what were you really gaining with Dante Moore being out there in a rainstorm? And Brock Thomas handled the elements and made a couple of throws. And so, yeah, I'll put that part at 3. The JKS thing as a 1.5. That's 1. I would love for JKS to, be Oregon's quarterback when Dante Moore leaves. Not that I don't think Dante or Austin Novosad or Luke Moga could, but yeah, JKS has got real game experience. He's a dog. He is an absolute stud. But no, I don't think that's lining up to be the case. So that second part of it, 1.5. Zach, SSA for you. Big Brain Dan knows how likely it is for Dante to come back. Instead of putting film out there, he's keeping Novosad hidden until next year when he too explodes on the scene. 1.5. I really don't believe, and I've been told this as well. I don't think it's any more complicated than Brock Thomas is just outperformed his recruiting ranking and is the backup quarterback because he's earned that position. And as I've said, if you watch the reps that he's given Oregon this year, it's pretty hard to argue with the output there. He can throw it down the field. He executes things very well. He looks comfortable in the pocket. Go back to the spring game and watch the way he threw the ball. I thought every quarterback looked good in the spring game. But in actual games this year, yeah, Brock Thomas been good. So would I be Interested to see Austin Novosad in the game setting? Sure, because we've barely seen that. But if they feel like Brock Thomas is better, trust the coaching staff with that one. Anytime there's a mystery at quarterback that doesn't make sense for recruiting reasons mostly and rankings wise, which I understand how people get to that particular headspace, the coaching staff has always been right. Why doesn't Ty Thompson play? Are we ever going to see Ty Thompson? Why do we have to keep watching Anthony Brown? Well, turns out Ty Thompson's not good enough. He's got physical traits, but not good enough between the ears to be a college quarterback. Fact of life. We couldn't have known that at the time. The staff did. So, yeah, all of that, 1.5. Closing with a little Tuesday trivia here. Bud sent this one in. It's tough. Who holds the Oregon Ducks career record for receiving yards since 2000? Career receiving yards since 2000. Okay, names that come to mind. Troy Franklin, Jeff Mail, Sammy Parker. Tez only had 2 years, so probably not. Maybe like a Josh Huff career receiving yards. That's a tough one. Franklin had 3 years. There was a preface of the question for you young whippersnappers out there, which makes me think there's a hint that this needs to be early 2000s. So, which of course I was a wee lad at that particular time. I'm going with it. Give me Sammy Parker. That's my guess. Gosh, I hope I'm right. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.